So this week's Parsha is Parshas Vayishlach, begins on page 171 in the Art Scroll Stone Chumash. That's Bereshis chapter 32, verse 4. And where we're holding right now is that Yaakov's on his way to, he had left Lavan in Aram and on his way back into the land of Israel. So it says, then Yaakov sent angels ahead of him to Esav his brother to the land of Seir, the fields of Edom, where Esav was living. He charged them, saying, thus shall you say to my lord to Esav, so said your servant Yaakov, I have sojourned with love, and I have lingered until now. I have acquired oxen and donkeys, flocks, servants, maidservants, and I am sending you to tell my lord to find favor in your eyes. So they went to give this message to Esav, and in verse 7, the angels returned to Yaakov, saying, we came to your brother to Esav, moreover, he is heading towards you, and 400 men are with him. Uh-oh. So he's in trouble.
Just the officers.
Yes, that's diminished. Yes, that he was coming with an army at Yaakov. So the commentaries ask that it says Yaakov said in verse 4 that he sent angels ahead of him to Esav to his brother. And it makes a point. It's Esav to his brother. We know who Esav is. It's not our first time meeting him. And then again, it says in verse 7, the angels returned to Yaakov saying, we have come to your brother, to Esav. So again, it's Yaakov said Esav, his brother. They said to your brother, to Esav, they mentioned both, that it's his brother and it's Esav. And yeah. So the Beis Levi explains that Yaakov was worried about two dangers that he had from Esav. He was worried about Esav coming to attack him. That was worried about Esav. That's what Esav was. He was, so he said, a hunter, a man of the field, a violent man, and he was afraid his brother would attack him. It said when he left, his brother wanted to kill him for having stolen the blessings, and he was afraid of that. But he was also afraid of his brother, meaning if he didn't come acting as an Esav, as an enemy, as a violent man, but he came as a brother with all showing love and mercy and friendship, that worried him perhaps even more than him coming as Esav. That if he's coming as Esav, we could fight against him and we could beat him. But if he was coming as a brother, that's even more dangerous. And our sages say that everything that we see from our patriarchs in the book of Bereshis is a sign for the future generations what's going to happen to us. To the point that the Gemara says that there was one of the great sages, every time he would deal with the kingdom in Rome, he would study this encounter with Yaakov and Esav before he would go. Because when dealing with the descendants of Esav, with the government in Rome, he had to examine how our patriarch dealt, how our ancestor dealt with their ancestor, because that set a precedent for everything that was to happen in the future. And we'll deal more with this with the wrestling with the angel that comes later in the parsha. But this was his fear was the fear that he had, not just for himself in this singular encounter, but for all encounters that Yaakov and the Bnei Yaakov, the sons of Yaakov, would have with the sons of Esav in the future. And throughout this exile, the exile of Esav, we've had an exile and we've had sorrows, we've had trouble from both directions. We've had trouble from the government in Rome and their descendants, Western civilization. We've had trouble with them attacking us and killing us. And we had trouble also with them showing us friendship and coming to us as a brother. And that may have even caused more destruction than the friendship. That's where there were causes of assimilation where instead of them attacking us and putting us in the ghetto, they threw open the doors. Come, you're just like one of us. And that was what Yaakov was more afraid of. So he was afraid of Esav. So he said, save me from to Esav, to his brother. And it continues in his prayer. We'll see he references this again on page 173. Page 173 in the Art Scroll Stone Chumash at the top. It says, Yaakov became very frightened and it distressed him, so he divided the people with him and the cattle, herds, and camels into two camps. For he said, if Esav comes to the one camp and strikes it down, then the remaining camp shall survive. Then Yaakov said, God of my father, this is verse 10 on page 173. Then Yaakov said, God of my father Avram, God of my father Yitzchak, Hashem has said to me, return to your land and to your relatives, and I will do good to you. And I have been diminished by all the kindness and by the truth that you have done for your servant. For with my staff I crossed this Jordan, I came with nothing, and now I have become two camps. Rescue me, please, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esav. Again, when he's asking for to be saved, he invokes that he's my brother and he's Esav. And the first fear was from my brother, if he's acting as a brother. For I fear him lest he come and strike me down, mother and children. And you have said, I will surely do good with you, and I'll make your offspring like the sand of the sea, which is too numerous to count. Okay, and then in the next section, he sends a tribute, he sends a gift. And this, our sages say, is, like we said, a precedent for how to deal with Esav and the descendants of Esav. And that is three things that he did. The first thing it says he did, he divided the people with him into two camps, meaning he at least came up with a military strategy. We'll split up, and even if he chases after one, some will survive. And he davened, he prayed to Hashem, and then he sent gifts to appease Esav. And these are the three approaches that we take whenever we deal with Esav that set a precedent for the future. Okay, where am I here? Oh yeah, so it begins here that it says that in verse 8, Yaakov had become very frightened and it distressed him. So the Beis Levi, as we've been going, the very frightened was that of Esav coming as Esav and attacking, and the distressed was if he's coming as a brother. But the commentaries ask that, like, why, our vision of a man of faith, like Yaakov is our model of the man of faith, that why is he frightened? Why is he afraid of this encounter? He's, like God's with him. God had promised he'd be okay, as he says, in his prayer. And you had said, I will surely do good with you. I'll make your offspring like the sand of the sea. So what does he have to be afraid if he's a man of faith? So some commentaries say that, I think Rashi says that he was, that he was afraid that his sins would that perhaps he had sinned or people in this camp would have sinned, and because of that he wouldn't deserve to be saved. Meaning this was told that he would have all of this stuff. He would have Hashem would be good to him, and he would have children like the sand of his descendants would be like the sand of the sea. But that's if he deserved it, and if he doesn't deserve it, perhaps he had sinned, and now he doesn't deserve it, and his sins would cause that it would cause a chil Hashem, it would cause desecration of God's name. God said things will be great for him, and it isn't. But Rabbi Shimon Schwab says that that the whole question is kind of based on a fallacy, and that's that a man of faith can't be afraid. And he said that's not exactly true. A man of faith could be afraid. It's the natural human tendency to be afraid, to have fear when a person is in a dangerous circumstance. If a person is going into battle, it's a natural thing to be afraid. The big question is what a person does after that. Is a person paralyzed by their fear? Or, as Yaakov did here, Yaakov prayed to Hashem, and after that, you don't find any more fear mentioned. And Rav Shimon Schwab gives an example of David HaMelech, King David, where we say in the Tachanun prayer that when we fall on our face after we put our heads down after Shemona Esrei, and it's from Tehillim, it's from King David, and it says there, favor me, Hashem, for I am feeble. Heal me, Hashem, for my bones shudder. My soul is utterly confounded. And you, Hashem, how long? And it sounds like he's in utter terror there. He says, I am wearied with my sight. Every night I drench my bed with my tears. I soak my couch. My eye is dimmed because of anger, aged by my tormentors. And then, so you hear this kind of terror in this of King David. But the next thing he says is, depart from me, all evildoers, for Hashem has heard the sound of my weeping. Hashem has heard my plea. Hashem will accept my prayer. The fear is gone. So he starts out with this terror, but he prays to Hashem, and once he prays, that's what removes his fear. So, and that's with Yaakov. He was very frightened, distressed him. He prayed, and then you don't see any fear again, to the point that Yaakov went out later in the Parsha, he went out all alone to across the river to get some small utensils that he had left behind. That the fear was gone. When a person is terrorized, the last thing he wants to do is go out by himself in the middle of the night. But he davened, and now he was done with the fear was past. Okay, what happens next? So he sends this tribute to his brother Esav. In verse 15, it begins the tribute: 200 she-goats, 20 he-goats, 200 ewes, that's female sheep, 20 rams, 30 nursing cattle, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 sheep, etc. And he sent them in separate groups. So one group would arrive, and then as that one arrives, so then there's another one coming over the horizon. And as that one arrives, there's another one coming over the horizon. So it seems like it's like gifts without end. And he told them to tell Esav on page 175 that when Esav asked you, who are you? Where are you going? Whose are these that are before you? You shall say, your servant Yaakov's, it is a tribute sent to my Lord to Esav. Behold, he himself is behind us. So this way he would appease Esav. Okay, so in verse 22, it says on page 175, verse 22, so the tribute passed on before him while he spent that night in the camp. But he got up that night and took his 2 wives, his 2 handmaids, his 11 sons, and crossed the fords of the Yabok, the river. And when he took them and had crossed over the stream, he sent over all his possessions. Then, in verse 25, Yaakov was left alone. And like I said, I say to say that he was retrieving some utensils he had left behind. And a man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. When he perceived that he could not overcome him, he struck the socket of his hip. So Yaakov's hip socket was dislocated as he wrestled with him. Then he said, let me go, for dawn has broken. This man that he was wrestling with said, let me go, for the dawn has broken. And Yaakov said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. He said to him, what is your name? And he replied, Yaakov. And then this man said, no longer will it be said that your name is Yaakov, but Israel, for you have striven with the divine and with man and had overcome. Then Yaakov inquired, and he said, divulge, if you please, your name. So he asked this man whether it was your name. And he said, why then do you ask of my name? And he blessed him there. So Yaakov called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen the divine face to face, yet my life was spared. The sun rose from him as he passed Penuel, and he was limping on his hip. Therefore the children of Israel are not to eat the displaced sinew on the hip socket to this day, because he struck Yaakov's hip socket on the displaced sinew. And this is where the source, we don't eat the giranasha, the sciatic nerve. Okay, so this man, our sages say, was they call it the Sarah Shel Esav. That's the angel or the spiritual essence of Esav, of the nation of Esav. And Yaakov wrestled with it until morning, and by morning he overcame it. So first of all, we see that it injured him, and our sages say that part of what this, like I said, that everything in Bereshis, especially with our patriarchs, is a sign and setting a precedence of what's to come in the future to their sons, to us. And this struggle with the angel of Esav, with the spiritual embodiment of Esav, is our struggle throughout all of history with Esav, up until, as it says, that he struggled until the dawn. How does it say it? Wrong page. And he said, let me go, for dawn has broken. So he wrestled with him until the break of dawn. And our sages say the break of dawn there is referring to the time of Mashiach, that the night represents their time of exile, and the morning, the daytime, is when we're after in the times of Mashiach. So the break of dawn is until the coming of Mashiach, and that means that our struggle with Esav, our constant back and forth with Esav, it's not something that we get away from until the coming of Mashiach. But he did injure him, that he struck the socket of his hip. And that was a sign that even though Esav will hurt us and hurt us badly, but he won't be able to completely destroy us, completely overcome us. We're going to win, but there will be times that he's going to injure us. And some of the commentaries say that this is actually a sign that the hip is the primary support structure for the body. That they say that if a person has a bad back or things of that nature, even the legs are hurting, their back is hurting, one of the things that the physical therapists say is that they need to strengthen their hips. because that's the muscle. First of all, it's one of the biggest muscles in the body, but that's what holds the whole weight of the body. And if that's weakened, so then the weight of the body, instead of going on that big, strong muscle, will go in other places, like the back. Yes. So what are the hips that, and so what this means that he could not overcome him and he struck the socket of his hip, dislocated his hip, means that he couldn't overcome Yaakov himself, the core of Yaakov, which is the Torah. But he was able to strike out at the support structure of the Torah, which is those who support the Torah. So Esav couldn't destroy and couldn't get in the way and damage those who study Torah themselves, but he was able to do damage to the support structure of the Torah, those who support the Torah. Okay, and okay, so then he said the let me go for the dawn has broken. What does that mean? Like, why does he have to let him go now that the dawn has broken? What's the difference? Is he like a vampire that light shines on him, he blows up, he burns up? What's the meaning of that? So our sages say it's actually the Gemara says in I didn't say it, probably wrote it here. Yeah, I'm not sure where I wrote this. Okay. So the Gemara says that the Gemara in Chulin, 91b, that every angel has one day that it's their time to sing Shira, to sing praise to Hashem. And that was his morning. And he was saying, it's my time now to sing praise to Hashem. Let me go to sing praise. And Yaakov wouldn't let him go until he blessed him. So I heard my Rashiva asked, "What is that?" Or Chaim Bressler, what does that mean? That was it a coincidence that this day happened to be the one day that he would sing Shira? Was this one day that he was in the middle of a wrestling match and he couldn't get away? What is that? What's the meaning of that? That this was the day that he was wrestling with Yaakov, was the day to sing Shira. So he answered that the meaning of that Gemara, that it's one day that an angel sings praises to Hashem, is that the praise to Hashem is the completion of their mission in life. And every angel has a job. Every creation of Hashem has a place in creation, has a mission, something to. There's a reason why it was created. It was created to fulfill a need for creation. And when it fulfills what it was created to fulfill, that's when it sings Shira. That's when it sings the song of praise. So Esav's job, what's the job of Esav? Esav, we think of Esav as like the bad guy, and in many stories or encounters, he is the bad guy. But what was he created for? Esav wasn't created to be Yaakov. If Esav was created to be Yaakov, he would just be Yaakov. Esav was created to be Esav. And that is, our sages say that this angel of Esav, is the Satan, it's the accuser, and it's the Yitzhahara, it's the evil inclination, it's the angel of death. And all that is that Esav was there to challenge us. Esav and the Satan, the Satan, it was created by Hashem in order to provide resistance to it for us so we could accomplish great things. If everything, they say that nothing that's worthwhile is easy. And Esav was there in order that we could really accomplish great things, because if it was all easy, there was no real accomplishments. And ultimately, what Esav was created to wrestle with us, and ultimately to be beaten by us. That if Esav wins, that's not his job. His job isn't to win, because if he wins, then we didn't accomplish our great things. And ultimately, Esav's job is to be beaten. So when Yaakov struggled with Esav all night and finally defeated Esav, that was Esav's fulfillment of his mission, to be defeated by Yaakov, to put up a good fight and be defeated by Yaakov. So that's why it was his time to sing Shira. It was his time to sing praises to Hashem, because he did his job. He finished his job. And that was a sign of things to come. The people, Esav, throughout history will be struggling with us throughout the night until the breaking of the dawn, when ultimately will be defeated by us. Okay, so now moving on. So we have this, we don't need the Ganasha, the sinew of the hip socket, which, like I said, is understood to be the sciatic nerve. So in chapter 33 on page 177, Yaakov raised his eyes and saw, behold, Esav was coming, and with him were 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, two handmaids. He puts the handmaid and the children first, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Yosef last. Then he himself went on ahead of them, bowed earthward 7 times until he reached his brother. And the commentaries say that this 7 times that he bowed, I think it was the Orachaim, is a reference to a verse in Mishlei, and to the Baal Turim actually, references a verse in Mishlei that a righteous person falls 7 times and gets up. And our sages say that a fool thinks that means that he falls, that he gets knocked to the ground, and in spite of that he gets up. It says that's not the case. It's not that in spite of being knocked down, he gets up. It's the knocking down itself that makes him the tzaddik. It's the being knocked down that allows him to rise up, that every time he's knocked down, he rises up stronger than he was before. And without the being knocked down, once again, without being knocked down, we wouldn't have an opportunity for growth. We wouldn't be able to get up and grow. So the righteous person is knocked down 7 times. Without those 7 times being knocked down, he wouldn't be the tzaddik that he was. He wouldn't be the righteous person that he was. Okay, so Yaakov bowed down 7 times in front of Esav, and until he reached his brother, and Esav ran towards him, embraced him, fell upon his neck, and kissed him, and they wept. And the commentaries say that this bowing down really appeased Esav. That Esav came with murder in his eyes, planning on killing him. He wasn't planning on running over and hugging him. But when he saw Yaakov bowing down and subjugating himself in front of him, so he ran and wept and hugged him. Okay, and the Ramban says that this deference really that Yaakov showed Esav was the custom with the firstborn, that the custom in that place and time was that the younger children would show a lot of deference to the older children. So Esav was angry at Yaakov for having taken the firstborn rights that he felt he should have. So when Yaakov bowed down and subjugated himself in front of him, he was showing him, I'm still treating you like the firstborn. And that appeased Esav. Okay, then in verse 5, he raised his eyes and saw, on page 179, saw the women and children and asked, who are these to you? All these women, the children, all this stuff. And he answered, the children whom God has graciously given your servant. So it says the handsmaid came forward, and they and their children, they bowed down. Yosef and Rachel came forward. Leah came forward with her children, they bowed down. And afterwards, Yosef and Rachel came forward and bowed down. The Medrash points out that by all of them, it says that the mothers and then the children, the handmaids and their children, Leah and her children. With Rachel, it's the opposite. It says that Yosef and Rachel came forward and bowed down. And our sages say that Yosef was concerned, but Yosef didn't even want Esav to see his mother, Rachel. She was beautiful, and he didn't want Esav to see her and get any ideas. So he stood in front of her. And that as a reward for that, that's why he was blessed in the blessing of Yaakov with the bracha, the blessing of Ali Ayin, that he's above the eye, meaning that he's not subject to Ayin Harat, an evil eye. That's some special power that Yosef has. He's not subject to an evil eye. Okay, so then there's a very interesting conversation here. So in verse 8, Esav asked, what did you intend by that whole camp that I had met? And meaning all those gifts that Yaakov was sending. Well, like what was the meaning of that? He answered, to gain favor in my Lord's eyes. Yaakov said, I wanted to gain favor in your eyes. I'm sending you a gift as a token of my respect. So in verse 9, Esav said, I have plenty. My brother, let what you have remain yours. And here our sages say, what does that mean? Let what you have remain yours. Here he actually gave in and agreed that the blessings should be Yaakov's. He's saying, let what's yours be yours. You got the brachos, you got the blessings, they should remain yours. And he actually gave in and forgave him and was okay with it.
Just finally admitted to himself that he sold his rights to get the first blessing.
He did, but when it actually happened and it came out through deceit, he at the time he was and up until this point, you're right, up until this point, he wouldn't he couldn't get over it. At this point he finally got over it. I mean, there are lots of things people are not entitled to that when it comes down to it and they get to the point that they don't get it, there's tremendous anger. That happens all the time. But Esau finally was able to, when he saw Yaakov now, he told him, what's yours, let what's yours be yours. But one thing he said here is, Esau said, I have plenty. What Yaakov's response was, but Yaakov said, no, I beg of you, if I have now found favor in your eyes, then accept my tribute from me, inasmuch as I have seen your face, which is like seeing the face of a divine being, and you are appeased by me. And then in verse 11, please accept my gift which was brought to you, inasmuch as God has been gracious to me, and inasmuch as I have everything. He urged him and he accepted. So there's two things that are very interesting here. First of all this part that he says, I've seen your face, which is like seeing the face of a divine being. It's like seeing, seeing you is like seeing the divine. Like what? Like that sounds like a little much flattery. So some of them, I think there's a medrash that says that what he was trying to hint to him is that I've actually seen your divine being. I've seen your spiritual essence, and I've already defeated him in order to put a little bit of the fear of God in Esav. That I've seen you like I've seen this your spiritual essence. But the Clay Yaakov kind of hints at this, the Beis Yitzchak elaborates on it, is that they say that this is actually a reference to when we come to visit the divine. And that is when we make Aliyah Regel, when we make our pilgrimage 3 times a year to the Beis Hamikdash, to the temple. There's a mitzvah when the temple is standing to make a pilgrimage 3 times a year on Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. And the Torah says, we say this in the Musaf, it says, "V'lo yiru as panai rekam." Don't come before me empty-handed, meaning that with respect, when we come visit, we should come bearing gifts. We should bring an offering when we come to the Beis Hamikdash. So Yaakov was saying that seeing you is like seeing the divine, meaning I've learned from there. You say that you have a lot. You have no need for my gifts, but I've learned God doesn't need our gifts. Yet when we visit, when we go to the temple, there's a mitzvah to bring something. It's respectful to bring something, even if they don't need it. And he said, I've learned from that even though you say you have a lot, I should be giving you something. And Esav accepted that. But another thing they say here is that Esav said in verse 9, Esav said, I have plenty. I have a lot. Yaakov, though, said in verse 11, inasmuch as God has been gracious to me and as much as I have everything. So Esav said, I have plenty. Yaakov said, I have everything. And the commentaries say they kind of understand it in two different ways, but I think the primary way is that Asa was saying, I have a lot. That doesn't meaning implied in that is there's more that I could have, meaning I would be very happy if I had double what I have a lot. If I had double that, that would be awesome. But I have a lot. Whereas Yaakov said, I have everything. I have everything means I can't imagine, like adding to everything doesn't give me anything more. And what Yaakov was saying was, everything I have, I've been given to by God, and whatever I need, whatever I should have, God gave me. So there's nothing more I could have. Because anything that I don't have is something that God hasn't given me, and there's a reason for that. So I have everything. There's everything I possibly could have, I have, and you can't add to that. Whereas Esav didn't have that perspective. I have a lot. I could have more, and I wish I had more, but I have a lot. Okay. Then there's another interesting conversation. In verse 12, and he said, travel on and let us go. I will proceed alongside you. This is Esav talking, saying, let's travel together. And in verse 13, but he said to him, Yaakov said, my lords know that the children are tender, the nursing flocks and cattle are upon me. If you come along with me, it'll just be a drag. We'll hold you back and you'll be going too slow. You'll be impatient. And he said, I will make my way at my slow pace according to the gait of the drove before me and the gait of the children until I come to my Lord at Seir. So first of all, that part of until I come to my Lord at Seir implies that Yaakov's going to go to Seir, which is where Esav lived. But he didn't go to Seir. He went to, he ended up going to Shem. Then he ended up going to his father, back to his father. So in Beis El. So What does it mean he's going to go with Esav? He's going to meet Esav in Seir. So first of all, the commentaries say, Rashi brings that this is a lesson that if a person is traveling, let's say if someone who you don't necessarily trust asks you where you're going, you shouldn't tell them your final destination. You should tell them somewhere farther along the line. Because that way, if they have bad intentions, so it's safer to tell them you're going farther, so they'll wait over there for you, and they'll never see you. You'll get off the train earlier. But they're bothered that also that Yaakov, our sage says, the Medrash says Yaakov's the man of truth. That the attribute that best describes Yaakov, our sages say, is emes, is truth. And this seems to be a falsehood. He said, "I'm going to meet you in Seir," and he wasn't going there. So the Medrash says that this is actually a reference to what's in the Haftarah.
Time of the Mashiach.
In the times of Mashiach, exactly. And so on page 1141, I mentioned this last week, but the Haftarah for Vayishlach is the entire book of Ovadia. So it's the entire book of the prophets. It's not long. It's not a long book of the prophets, but it's an entire book of the prophets, the book of Ovadia. And it's a prophecy about Edom, about Esav. Our sages say that Ovadia was a descendant of converts who came from Esav, who converted from Esav, and so he had this this prophecy. And where am I? And it concludes. In verse 21, the last verse, just starting even from the last verse of the Haftarah on page 1142, verse 21, it states, "Then saviors will ascend Mount Zion to judge Esav's mountain, and the kingdom will be Hashem's." So they'll ascend Mount Zion to judge Esav's mountain. What is Esav's mountain? That's Mount Seir. So they're saying, Yaakov was saying, we're going to get there. It might take a long time. We'll go at our own pace, as he said. Yaakov said, we'll go at our own pace at the gate of the children at our own pace, but we're going to get to Mount Seir. And that's what's referenced in the Haftarah, in the coming of Mashiach, that Yaakov will eventually meet Esav. In the beginning. Yes. Okay. So let's continue. So in verse 16, they parted. So Esav started back that day on his way towards Seir, but Yaakov journeyed to Sukkos and built himself a house for his livestock. He made shelters. Therefore, he called the name of the place Sukkos. Then, in verse 18, Yaakov arrived intact at the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, upon arriving from Padan Aram. That he had recovered from this injury that he got from the angel, or from the that he yeah, I gotta go with that he was healed from the injury that he got with his encounter with the angel. So at the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, upon arriving from Padan Aram, he encamped before the city. And in verse 19, he bought a parcel of land upon which he pitched his tent for his children. He pitched his tent from the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 kesitas, and he set up an altar there and proclaimed, God, the God of Israel. Meaning, he named the altar that God is the God of Israel, and to publicize that. But and I forgot, I think it's Rabbeinu Baicha, I don't remember who it was that I saw this, that he comments that he bought the parcel of land upon which he pitched his tent. He says that there's three places in the three places in the land of Israel that we find that they were purchased instead of conquered. One of them, so we've encountered two of them already. One of them was the cave of Machpelah. That was in Parshas Vayishlach, where Avram bought the cave and plain of Machpelah, where Adam and Eve, Avram and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, and Yaakov and Leah are buried. One of them is right here, this field in front of the city of Shechem, the parcel of land in front of Shechem. And one of them is King David bought the Goren Arnon, the threshing floor of Arnon, which was the place was the Temple Mount, the place where the Beis Hamikdash, the temple, was to be built. And those are the three places that were. Those are the three places that instead of being conquered, we purchased. And I think it's Ben Abachas says, because of the great holiness of these places, that it was inappropriate that they would be spoils of war, that they would be acquired through bloodshed. And okay, so it was inappropriate they'd be acquired through bloodshed, so instead they were purchased. So what's the great holiness of this place? We understand the cave of Machpelah, the burial place of the patriarchs and matriarchs, and the place of the temple. What's this place in front of Shechem? So in front of Shechem are the mountains of Mount Gerizim and Mount Avel, where they proclaimed blessings and curses when they first entered the land of Israel, when Joshua led the Jews into the land of Israel from Egypt. So they went up those mountains and proclaimed the blessings if we keep the Torah, and the curses if we don't keep the Torah. And that was this place that he purchased in front of Shechem. Okay, so now chapter 34. Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had born to Yaakov, went out over to look over the daughters of the land. Shechem, son of Hamor the Chivite, the prince of the region, saw her. He took her, lay with her, and violated her. That means that he raped her and sodomized her. He horribly mistreated her. He became deeply attached to Dinah, daughter of Yaakov. He loved the maiden, appealed to the maiden's emotions. So Shechem spoke to Hamor, his father, saying, "Take this girl for a wife." So Yaakov heard about this, and Yaakov kept silent until his son's arrival. He let his sons take care of this. So Hamor, Shechem's father, who's the chieftain of this the Chivites of this region, went to Yaakov to speak to him and Yaakov's sons, and they were distressed. They were fired deeply with indignation, for he had committed an outrage in Israel by lying with the daughter of Yaakov. Such a thing may not be done. And Hamor says, so Hamor offered them in verse 8 on page 183, saying, Shechem, my son, longs deeply for your daughter. Please give her to him as a wife, and intermarry with us. Give us your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourself. And among us you shall dwell. The land will be before you, settle and trade in and acquire property in it. They were offering, they could pretty much be citizens. They could be one of them, and they could marry into their tribe, and they could trade with them. They could even buy land with them. There'd be one of them pretty much. Okay, and he offered to pay a big marriage settlement. So in verse 13, Yaakov's sons answered Shechem and his father Hamor cleverly, and they spoke, and they said to him, "We cannot do this thing to give our sister to a man who is uncircumcised. Only on this condition will we acquiesce to you, if you become like us by letting every male amongst you become circumcised, because we won't marry into any group that's uncircumcised." So you would think that would be a very good negotiating tactic if you don't want something, because you're giving them an offer, you're leaving them with the respect that they're the ones making the decision. You're not telling them no, you're leaving the decision in their hands, but it's not a decision that they'd be able to pull off because everyone in the tribe would have to agree to get circumcised, which sounds pretty irrational, but they agreed. In verse 18, their proposal seemed good in the view of Hamor and the view of Shechem, Hamor's son, and he did not delay doing it, and they convinced the people of the land to go ahead with it. They convinced the people in the tribe to go ahead with this. And they listened, and they did it. So now on page 185, verse 25, and it came to pass on the third day when they were in pain, that two of Yaakov's sons, Shimon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword, and they came upon the city confidently and killed every male. And Hamor and Shechem and his son they killed at the point of sword. Then they took Dinah from Shechem's house and left. So when everybody was in the most pain from the circumcision, they went in and killed all the men. And in verse 27, the sons of Yaakov came upon the slain, and they plundered the city which they had defiled with their sister, their flocks, their cattle, their donkeys, whatever was in town, whatever was in the field they took, all the wealth, all the children, their wives they took captive, and they plundered as well everything in the house. Okay. So what was Yaakov's response to this? In verse 30, Yaakov said to Shimon and Levi, "You have discomposed me, making me odious amongst the inhabitants of the land, amongst the Canaanite, among the Perizzite. I am few in number, and should they band together and attack me, I will be annihilated, I and my household." In verse 31, and they said, "Should he treat our sister like a harlot?" And this was actually a disagreement between Yaakov and his sons, Shimon and Levi, as to how to deal with this. That Yaakov said that you're right, maybe that they deserve that, but you have to take into account how others, inhabitants of the land, will look at this. And they'll view this as that these people violently destroyed a city, killed all these people, and Yaakov was telling them you have to take that into account. So the commentaries asked that what was Yaakov thinking? Meaning, what did he think their plan was when he was there? It said he was listening. His sons responded that they would do the bris milah, and then they would intermarry. Did Yaakov really think that was going to be what was going to happen? And he was okay with this? Wow, you would think he understood that they were going to kill everyone in the city. So I think it's the Ramban answers that he understood that the intention, first of all, he didn't think that they were going to agree to be, he thought this was a negotiating tactic, and they wouldn't agree to get circumcised. And even if they would, his understanding was they would go in, grab Dinah, and get her out, and while they were weakened, meaning they would use the bris milah, they would use the circumcisions as a way to weaken them so they could get her out, not as a way to kill everyone there. Okay. And the Medrash actually says that there actually was that Yaakov actually had to strap up in battle, and they had to actually fight. That there were groups in the land who did attack them over this, and he had to fight back. Okay. So moving on page 187, Yaakov goes to Beis El, and he was building an altar. And then in verse 6, he told them all to get rid of any alien gods that they had plundered from Shechem. When they had plundered from Shechem, get rid of anything that was connected to idolatry. And where am I? And in verse 5, it says on page 187, verse 5, they set out and there fell godly terror on the cities which were around them, so they did not pursue Yaakov's sons. Okay. So now he came to Luz, he built an altar, and in verse 8, the bottom of page 187, it says, Devorah, the wetness of Rivka, died, and she was buried below Beis El, below the plateau, and he named it Alon Bachus, which is the place of weeping. And the Bachus here, the weeping is plural, it's like the place of weepings, plural, and our sages say that, in fact, it wasn't just Devorah who died at this time, it was Rivka, his mother, died at that time also, that he just received word that Rivka had died. And the Torah hints at it, but doesn't say it explicitly, because who was there with Rivka? Who was there to bury Rivka? That Esav was in Seir, his son Esav was in Seir, Yaakov was on the road, he was traveling, and Yitzchak was blind. So it was the local Chivites, the local Hittites, the Chiti, who lived around them, that were the ones who buried Rivka, and in order that should be, and the Torah doesn't want to say that explicitly, so he just hints at her death. That you see that she didn't. So you see that she died, but it doesn't want to say it explicitly. Okay, then on page 189. And verse 9, and Hashem appeared to Yaakov again when he came from Padan Aram, and he blessed him. Then Hashem said to him, your name is Yaakov, your name shall not always be called Yaakov, but Israel should be your name. And this is where he is given by the name Israel by Hashem. And you see earlier, where am I? So when he struggled with the angel, yeah. Yeah. So on page 177, verse 28, very similar, it says, he said to him, what is your name? He replied, Yaakov. He said, no longer will be said that your name is Yaakov, but Israel, for you have striven with the divine with men and have overcome. So he was telling him, the angel was telling him that this is what Hashem is going to do, meaning that God is going to call you Yisrael because you have striven with the divine and beaten it. Okay, then Hashem blessed Yaakov, and he made an altar. And then in verse 16, they journeyed from, this is 189, verse 16, they journeyed from Beis El, there was still a stretch of land to go to Ephras, when Rachel went into labor and had difficulty in her childbirth. And it was when she had difficulty in her labor that the midwife said to her, "Have no fear, for this one too is a son for you." And it came to pass as her soul was departing, for she died, that she called his name Ben Oni, which literally would mean the son of my distress, of my pain, because she was so much pain from childbirth. And as she died in that childbirth. But his father called him Binyamin, which the Ramban says means the son of my right hand. And the Ramban says that this is actually a more favorable interpretation of what his mother named him. That On, Ben Oni, the son, it means the son of my pain, but On could also mean strength. It's an interesting word, but it can mean either. And Yaakov kind of called him Binyamin, which is an interpretation, the son of my right hand, meaning the son of my strength. And that was the meaning of Binyamin.
The right hand that was on the Esau's heel.
I don't know. But the right hand is usually the stronger hand. That's where you do your stronger things with. So in verse 19, thus Rachel died and was buried on the road to Ephras, which is Bethlehem. And Yaakov set up a monument over his grave. It is the monument of Rachel's grave until today. And so that's the Kever Rachel, the burial place of Rachel. And our sages say that she was buried by the road instead of in Marasa Machpelah, in the cave of Machpelah, where the other patriarchs and matriarchs are buried. She was buried in a different place on the road. And the reason for that is that when their descendants passed by on the way into exile, on the way to exile in Babylon, so they passed by Rachel's tomb and they cried there and prayed there, and Rachel prayed on their behalf when they came to her tomb, and Hashem said, answered her prayers that have no fear, they'll be saved. So so her tomb was put there on the road that they would pass on the way out of the land of Israel. Okay, then in verse 21, Israel journeyed on, pitched his tent beyond Migdal Eder, and it came to pass that while Israel dwelt in the land, that Reuben went and lived with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard, and the sons of Israel, Yaakov, were 12. So the sons of Yaakov were 12. The commentators say it kind of has a double meaning. That first of all, it's a continuation of what was just said, which is that Binyamin was born. Now Yaakov had his 12 sons. But it's also a statement about Reuven, that don't think that this means literally that Reuven actually lay and had intimate relations with his son's wife, his son's concubine, because Bilhah, that then he would be disowned as a son. It said that Reuven, the sons of Yaakov were 12. Reuven was still Yaakov's son even after this. So what does it mean? So the commentaries say, the Malbim speaks this out very clearly, that Reuven was always disturbed that his mother Leah was kind of the secondary wife of Yaakov. That Rachel was like Yaakov's primary wife, and Leah, even though she married him first, but she was seen as a secondary wife. She was less important, and Yaakov's bed tended to be in Rachel's tent. So when Rachel died, Reuven thought, now's this great opportunity. Finally, my mother is going to be the main wife and and Yaakov's bed is going to be in her tent. But instead, Yaakov moved his bed to Bilhah's tent, who was the concubine who was the maidservant of Rachel. And that angered Reuven, and he moved his father's tent from there into Leah's tent. And that getting involved in his father's marital life like that, the Torah considers like he actually had relations with Bilhah. And that was the sin. And then it says the sons of Yaakov were 12. The commentaries say that there was actually supposed to be 2 more sons born, and that would have been the result of that union. But because he moved he moved the bed, so they weren't born from Yaakov, and Ephraim and Manasseh were born from Yosef, yet they became equal tribes to the other tribes. And that's what it means here. The Kabbalah say that the sons of Yaakov were 12, meaning that there wouldn't have been 12. But because of this interference of Reuven, there were only 12. Okay, so then it talks about the Yaakov's sons. And in verse 27, Yaakov came to Yitzchak, his father, at Mamre, Kiryas Arba, that is Hebron, where Avram and Yitzchak sojourned. Yitzchak's days were 180 years, and Yitzchak expired and died on page 193, and was gathered to his people, old and fulfilled of days. His sons Esav and Yaakov buried him. Okay, and then it goes through the descendants of Esav. And I'll just do the beginnings of Esav. And these are the descendants of Esav. He is Adam. Esav had taken his wives from among the Canaanite women, Ada, daughter of Elon the Hittite, and Alibama, daughter of Anna, daughter of Tzivoyon the Chivite, and Basmas, daughter of Yishmael, sister of Neviah. So 2 wives were Canaanite, women of the land. One was a Hittite, a Chiti, one was a Chivi, and one was from the family, was a daughter of Yishmael, who was his first cousin. Okay, and then it goes through, and just the important here in verse 4, Ada bore to Esav Eliphaz, and they went to Mount Seir. And in verse 9, I'm just trying to find. Oh, in verse 11. So we had Eliphaz. And in verse 11, the sons of Eliphaz were Teman, Omer, Tzipho, Gatam, and Kenaz. And Timnah was a concubine of Eliphaz, son of Esav, and she bore Amalek to Eliphaz. And this is the origin of Amalek. Okay, and then it goes through the chiefs, the great leaders that came from the family of Esav. And then it goes through the chiefs of Seir, who was involved in Esav's family, that Esav married a descendant of Seir and eventually lived in Mount Seir. So Mount Seir, I mentioned, was the territory of Esav. He took over that area. And in verse 20, these are the sons of Seir, the Chorite, who was a Chori, who were settled in the land Lotan, Shaval, Tzivayon, Anna, Dishan, Ezer, Dishan, etc. And it says Lotan's sister was Timnah. And going back, let's see if I could find it. Okay. Yeah, and not right now. Okay. So and then really the parsha concludes with the list of all these descendants of Esav and the great leaders that came from Esav and the genealogy of Seir, which is where Esav took over. And then on page 197, it has the Edomite kings who were descended from Esav. Okay, shkoyach. Have a great Shabbos. Yeah, Chaim.